on at some point in time. I'm just going to have to stay off the video right now, but can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, maybe at
Are you
some point
having,
in time.
are you having
Yeah,
a,
I am having a problem trying to locate it. It's downloaded and everything, but I can't go and find it. I looked in my downloads,
mhm.
so maybe I'm doing something wrong. And please forgive me for delaying the time. So this, you
No, well,
know, this.
we built in some flexibility to start shortly after the the time that the conference, you know, the audience had started assembling. Why don't you just do the video, and it has the backdrop is for our Black is Back webinar, which relates directly to the topic. So I don't think it's going. I think we'd rather see your beautiful face, and then worry
Okay.
about
All
whether
right,
you're.
but certainly I can definitely use that.
Yeah,
Okay, I
yeah,
think that's all.
yeah, I think we can compensate.
Okay, great. All right, then that'll work. And then at some point in time, maybe I can change it out.
Miss Lisa, were you trying to make a comment?
I'm so glad you know that I was muted. I wanted to just say, I just unite with you about Sister Belinda Parker. She's so powerful, and to see her presentation is
All
just.
right, here I
Yeah.
go. Here I go.
Yeah.
Awesome, awesome, wonderful. You know, again, I apologize for the delay in the time, but this is a great day, everybody. And look like we have quite a few participants have already joined us. But we're gonna go right into our press conference. And we have some minor housekeeping that we need to do. The first thing I would like for everyone to do is take the time out to get, my grandmother said, two of the most powerful tools in the world, two of the most powerful tools in the world, pencil and paper. Get something for you to be able to write down, because we're going to assimilate some very important but necessary information that you're going to need to follow up on. So take the time out to do that, as well as, you know, I think I just mentioned about the fact that, you know, maybe, you know, send out a message to a loved one or someone that may need a last minute reminder to be a part of this conference too as well. So right now, what I want everybody to do that that are not already in our contacts, if you're not already in our contacts, I want you to text 76626. That's 76626. And that would immediately put you into our contacts, and you would become a part of our database, so that you would be the very first person to get a invitation to any future events that we may have, webinars, press conference, you know, or maybe just any action items. You would be the first person to get that information. That would go immediately into our database. You can also become a partner with us with Motivity, that would help us raise funds for our mission as well. So it's called the V card. If you're not familiar with it, you know, everybody is getting away from paper now. So, you know, they're using their phones for a lot of, you know, easy access and different things like that. So that's what that would do. And again, that's 76626
Okay.
text.
Okay,
And
let
okay,
me 77626. I
no,
put
76626.
okay, I had it
Seven.
wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sorry
Okay,
about that.
wait a minute. Let me get up. Okay, Dr. Zena, I'm sorry about that. I had to go get my phone. It's blowing up over here on the other table. Okay, and you know, again, this is this technology is amazing. I feel really good about being here in my home and being able to reach out to thousands of people, because after we finish this conference, we're going to be able to go and paste this information, which Dr. Zena does so well, you know, to put it out there through all of our social media outlets. And for our listeners, again, we want you to go and follow us. No, I want you to like us on Facebook, which is Louisiana United International. Okay, this is housekeeping. This is very important. We want you to like us because we want to get our numbers up. So you can like us on Facebook at Louisiana United International. You can also follow us on Twitter, Belinda Parker-Brown. Okay, that's on Twitter. They're doing a lot of that now. You can also follow us on Instagram at Belinda Parker-Brown. Okay, so and make sure all of our information is at our website, and that is LouisianaUnitedI.org. That's www.louisianai.org. Okay, thank you so much. We'll probably be giving that information out again. Dr. Zena can post it on the screen at some point in time. And if you have any questions about, you know, what that information was, just put it in the chat box and we'll make sure you get that information to be able to stay in contact with us. So let's go right into our press conference. I want to start off by saying how much I appreciate everyone that have taken the time out of their busy schedules to be a part of such a historic moment and an opportunity to participate in this historic moment. It means so much to us because we have been on the battleground, down in the trenches, you know, fighting for quite some time. And I just want to say to people that, you know, you can fight for so long, but at some point in time, you need to get a victory. And we have won several victories, but the you know, in battles, like some people say, but the war is not over. We have many more you know, battles to win before we actually ultimate you know, hit, you know, this whole thing to where it really needs to be, and that is to change the world, people. We have to change this world. And after we come out of this horrific crisis that we're facing right now, it will never, ever be the same. So Louisiana United means that we are here and we're not going anywhere. You know, we are joining our forces with other, you know, grassroots organizations and powerful organizations across this country. Okay, and Black is Back Coalition is definitely one of them that have networked several organizations together, and Sister Lisa going to speak to the power of that organization and why we are so excited to be a part of it. So listen, people, if it's ever been a time for us to unite and come together and be a part of a historic moment in our country, now is that time. And I just want to, you know, extend my appreciation to all of the organizations that have joined up with us, all of the members and supporters, all of our allies that have, you know, said that, you know, I'm in, you know, I'm united with this movement. So I just want to say how much I appreciate you and thank you. So with that said, I want to go into you know, our agenda for today. Dr. Zena, do you want to take it from there?
Okay, well, we have several members of the Louisiana community who have joined us, and I want to encourage you to, if you look under the participants button at the bottom of your screen, you can click on that and you should see an icon to the right for you to raise your hand. And if you raise your hand and you want to make a comment, I can open up your mic so that you can speak. So before we go into talking about the position statement, the Louisiana United International position statement on the COVID-19 and its impact on African Americans who are incarcerated by the state of Louisiana, if there are any of our members, panelists who are members of the residents of Louisiana, former residents of Louisiana, advocates who have been part of bringing
Traveling to
about
Louisiana.
criminal justice reform in the state of Louisiana. If you have any questions, or if you want to address our audience now for 1 or 2 minutes, feel free to raise your hand. If not, we'll go into that part of our press conference where we're addressing the actual position statement. And then, of course, we're going to hear later on in our presentation directly from Ms. Lisa Davis, who is Vice Chair of the Black is Back Coalition, as well as Ms. Betty Davis, who is a Black is Back Coalition member, and also the leader of the new abolitionist movement, among many other social justice organizations, particularly in working with free and political prisoners around the world. So if any raised hands at this point? Okay, well, if not,
one of
go
the things, Dr. Zena, I would like for us to, take a brief moment and to, if possible, that I know we have Sister Betty and Sister Lisa to just interject on the importance of us all coming together in wake of this COVID-19 and how people are suffering in the prisons and jails before they just, with a brief introduction.
Okay. Ms. Betty Davis and Ms. Lisa Davis, if you want to unmute your microphone and please do go ahead and address our audience at this time on that topic.
Well, I just want to say that I am so very, very glad and appreciative to be standing on the right side of justice with my brothers and sisters in Louisiana and throughout the world. And as you mentioned, the Black is Back Coalition, we are a coalition of organizations dedicated to the liberation of African people. And we do stand with all oppressed people, but we cannot at all turn our backs to how African people have been treated throughout this world under colonialism, and especially in the United States. But just I want to make it clear, we are a coalition of organizations throughout this country with global reach. So just know that when you see me and when you see my Sister Betty Davis, by the way, we are not biologically related, but we are certainly spiritually related. But we're all one anyway. That you are looking, you've got strong support behind you. And our goal is to make sure that that support continues, that we amplify it. So thank you again.
And Ms. Davis, Betty Davis.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. The Louisiana United Incorporated is an example of the type of institutions we have to build if we're going to overcome oppression.
That's
Queen
right.
Mother Moore, who was a historian and one of the people who fought for freedom in the United States, she said, if you don't control your institutions, if you don't control your quote unquote ghetto, then you are really a colony. And she emphasized that. And this is one of the reasons that Black people are showing up all over the world in an endangered species environment because they don't control their institutions. So the new abolitionist movement has always been at the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is you got to know how to read your world. Paulo Freire said, we have to know how to read our world. We have to deal with metaphysical imperialism. You know what imperialism is? When somebody comes in and takes over your culture, your land, your resources. But what is metaphysical? It's your mind. So the new abolitionist movement always said, let's focus on education. The laws in the United States give us the power to control our community schools. With community schools, you control your culture, your curriculum, the contracts, the teachers, the plumbers, anyone dealing with the school system. Do you really believe we would have people lining up in nail salons and having house parties during this COVID pandemic if we controlled our communities, if we controlled education, if we controlled their minds through our community system on a public school level? No, you would not. It takes a village. We don't control our village. And that's why we call ourselves the new abolitionists. Because when we come out of this, the organizations that we have will determine whether or not we survive COVID-19 and anything else that's coming in the future. We're talking about money and minds. And if you're not a part of Black is Back Coalition, we hope you will join. And if you're not behind the force that the Louisiana United International represents, we hope you will come on board. We need institutions to fight institutional racism. And this is one of them that has done it and has done it successfully. And so it's a privilege to be a part of this group. We're not all on the same page, but we do unite around one thing. Oppression is a bad thing. Slavery is a bad thing. And in Louisiana, throughout the United States, we got both of them. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have the website for the Black is Back Coalition posted into our chat room. Mr. Washington wants to make a comment. Mr. Washington, if you can get your video turned on, and then I can unmute your phone line. And then we can have your comment. Ms. Parker, Ms. Belinda, you were talking about the progression during our webinar addressing this topic, not so much focusing on the position paper, but just generally talking about Louisiana's response to COVID-19 and its population of incarcerated African Americans. You trace that history from the war on crime, and then the Katrina catastrophe, and now the COVID-19 pandemic, and how the African American community in Louisiana was hit particularly hard than any other population, harder than any other population, given those national emergencies, crisis. Can you elaborate a bit on that for us?
Yes, Dr. Zena, that is so important, and that's the reason why that we're here in Louisiana and we're suffering. And the most saddest thing about what's happening to especially the Black communities and Black and brown people here in the state of Louisiana is that, like you said, is that first we had the war on drugs, and Louisiana became I guess I want to say the headquarters to having more people incarcerated than anywhere else in the world. Then we had Katrina, and the whole world was watching us on how bad we were treated here. And now we got the COVID-19. And this, I'm telling you, if we think those things were bad, this is going to be worse. We have people, that are, there is a major, major disparity in how Black people are being treated with this pandemic. Especially the people that are in the prisons and in the jails. And they're not telling us the truth. They are not telling us the truth. All of our life, people, we have been lied to, things have been covered up, things have been, schemed up, and then they tell us one thing and they do something else. And this is the problem that we're having here in Louisiana. We as Black people know that if it's ever been a time for us to stand up and unite, and say that this type of treatment will not be tolerated. We will not come out of this pandemic knowing that we have been marginalized, we have been treated wrongfully, and that's what we're standing up, and that is part of our position that we're getting ready to take on this endeavor.
Thank you, Ms. Parker-Brown. Part of our position statement includes a picture of what's happening inside of Louisiana detention centers and jails and prisons from the view of the people who are confined there. And it's a dramatically different picture than what you get if you visit the websites of Louisiana's Department of Public Safety and Corrections. So as we indicated during our last webinar, the information that we are getting from the government is unreliable. It's in direct contradiction of the reports we're getting from people who are confined in those facilities. So at this point, that we cannot presume or work from the presumption that we're getting accurate information from the inside. Now, Mr. Washington looks like he's still working on getting his video together, but as soon as you get that done, I'll go ahead and open up your lines. But in the meantime, we're going to move on and focus a bit now on the position statement. I guess I should say that my name is Zena Crenshaw-Logal, Dr. Zena Crenshaw-Logal. My doctorate is in jurisprudence, which is what you get when you graduate law school. And one of my many roles as a human rights advocate is Assistant Chief of Operations for Louisiana United International. I anticipate that LUI is going to host a conference sometime soon for an expanded discussion of its position statement on Louisiana's response so far to the impact of COVID-19 on incarcerated African Americans. COVID-19 is no less an assault on this population, the African Americans that are confined by the state in Louisiana, is no less an assault on that population than any other. And it's over and beyond the fact that African Americans are a discernible group, a community that's historically oppressed in the United States. It's very significant, at least in from my perspective, that African Americans comprise approximately 33% of the population in the state of Louisiana. However, it comprises 67% of its prison population. So these are literally thousands of people who are experiencing an assault in the form of a deadly virus. Protecting this population, protecting African Americans that are incarcerated in Louisiana, requires a look at crime and punishment. So joining us today is a scholar and retired criminal law practitioner, Police Chief Gordon Police Chief Gordon L. Wiborg Jr. I've known Mr. Wiborg personally for several years now, and I can assure you that he is a man of integrity and committed to protection of the constitutional rights of all Americans, even though he has been a criminal law enforcement officer for, I think, about 35 years at this point. Well, prior to retirement, he had a prestigious career in the military before then. In fact, I'm going to put a link, if I can, to his bio in our chat room as soon as possible, because I think it's very important for us to understand just the caliber of the credentials that associated with the views he's going to share with us this morning. Now, Chief Wiborg, I have 3 points I'd like you to address for our audience, and of course, you and I have discussed them in advance. As you know, LUI's position statement calls on Louisiana to address COVID-19 differently than any other assault that incarcerated people may experience. What do you say to people who think that any assault that incarcerated people suffer is an acceptable price for them to pay for their crimes? Are people who think that it's better that incarcerated people endure these assaults, even if their exposure to a deadly virus? There are a lot of people who think, it seems that a lot of people who seem to think that it's better that incarcerated people endure those assaults than get an early release. And then there's also the contention that's circulating in the state of Louisiana as well across the country, that it's better to try to minimize the risk of the people who are confined in the state of Louisiana or anywhere in the country. It's better to just try to minimize their risk and make decisions that minimize early release, even if in the process of doing that, they're disregarding virtually all recommendations by the Center for Disease Control. And Louisiana clearly lacks the staff and other capabilities to properly test and treat symptomatic inmates. So that's quite a mouthful, quite a bit a lot of moving parts to that scenario I painted for you. Hopefully our audience is still following us, and you've had a chance to know in advance the factors that are emphasized by LUI's position statement. So at this point, from your perspective as a scholar, criminal law practitioner, what do you have to say to people who would be pushing back from LUI's unique position, given those considerations that I just delineated?
Dr. Zena, if it's possible, before the chief take that place, I want to set the picture, because we're boots on the ground, and LUI is experiencing these devastating stories coming from loved ones that are that have family members incarcerated. And when we have stories like people are being told that if they don't take a plea, they're gonna die from the coronavirus in the jail. And these people are, sitting there, they have been violated in regards to over 120 days, have not been to trial, okay, because they want to force and threaten and badger them to take a plea. Now we got the COVID-19, and they're using that as a tool to force and threaten and badger people to take a plea. And then we have stories like, that everybody in the kitchen, the trustees, were infected with the COVID-19. And now that everybody is sick, the kitchen is, the food is contaminated, and the inmates are afraid to eat because they don't want to get sick. We have a place like Angola, where they're using that here in Louisiana as a quarantine headquarters. Now, this is wrong. And everybody that gets sick from the COVID-19 or been tested with the COVID-19, they're taking them out to Angola by the busload and shipping them out there with, as if it's going to become a death camp, okay? And they're going to haul these people out on top of each other in body bags. And we're saying that, this is wrong here in Louisiana.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Yes, and so Chief Wiborg, you see the elaboration of the picture of what they're facing in Louisiana. So from a law enforcement perspective, how do you respond? And also as a scholar with regard to relevant criminal law enforcement standards and constitutional standards.
Good morning, Dr. Crenshaw-Logal, and thank you for those kind words. Ms. Parker-Brown, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We're here this morning in this press conference because these are novel and unprecedented times. They call for novel and unprecedented decision-making, which requires novel and unprecedented thinking. New thinking. If we continue to deal with COVID-19, the pandemic that is scourging the world right now, if we continue to deal with that with the same thinking that we have had in the past, we will fail in that battle. We cannot fail in the battle against COVID-19. That is truly an emergency. It is a national emergency, called that by the President of the United States. In fact, the United States is one of 152 nations in the world who have declared national emergencies. There are 195 nations in the world. 180 of them admit to being impacted by COVID-19. Of that 180, 152 have called it a national emergency. Now, it's a national emergency for us because, as of this morning, more than 56,000 people have died of COVID-19. 56,000 people. Some estimates are 3 to 4 times that because there is no checkbox for COVID-19 on a death certificate for the cause of death. The cause of death is normally put down as heart failure, multiple organ failure, pneumonia, heart failure, whatever it may be, all of which may be triggered by COVID-19. And that person suffers and dies. Their death may indeed be caused by heart failure, but it has been accelerated and happens now in the pandemic because of COVID-19. So I would estimate, for what it may be worth, that the death toll nationally and globally is far greater already than the 56,000 already called dead of COVID-19. We've also had over 988,000 people who have tested positive and come down with symptoms for COVID-19. 988,000 people. That's 1 million people. And again, some estimates are 3 to 4 times that. Now, I spent 35 years in law enforcement, 43 years total in emergency management. We deal in emergencies all the time. And in fact, there are times where there's almost always a statewide or regional emergency called in the United States. However, there are very few times when the President of the United States is compelled to call a national emergency. That is one step below martial law. That should impress upon everyone that this is truly an unprecedented emergency and one that takes a new way of thinking to deal with a new pandemic. What do I say to the people that have those beliefs? For example, that any assault they suffer is an acceptable price to pay for their crimes in the prisons? You don't have to listen to me to hear an answer for that. Because Attorney General William Barr, the Attorney General of the United States, just put out a memo yesterday to his federal prosecutors. All U.S. prosecutors got this memo by email, probably immediately. In that memo, Attorney General Barr has said a number of things, several of which are key here for our topic. We talk about constitutional rights. I have heard law enforcement officers, and prison officials say, well, when you're in prison, you don't have any constitutional rights. I'm sorry, that is BS. That is not true. Granted, some rights are infringed upon when I am in prison. But as Attorney General Barr said yesterday in his memo, the Constitution is not suspended in times of crisis. That is important. The Constitution is not suspended in times of crisis. Neither is the Constitution suspended for those imprisoned by our states and country. They have constitutional rights. They also have the God-given human rights that all of us have, whether we are in or out of custody. So, to those people I say, if you don't know what the Constitution says and what it requires you as an official to do, then you need to read and you need to get smart. Because in your position, you have taken an oath. And that oath isn't only to the state. It isn't only to the people of this country. You have taken an oath to the Constitution of the United States. And that Constitution applies when I'm in prison as well as when I am home.
What about the public safety, the concerns that are being expressed about what may happen if these inmates are given early releases and return to the communities from which they have families and friends?
I have heard that there are some officials, the Attorney General of Louisiana has recommended to the governor not to release incarcerated people early because of the threat they pose to the state and the community. Now, first of all, just because I have been convicted of a crime and imprisoned for that crime does not mean I am automatically a threat to the community when I am released later on. Not everyone is imprisoned for life for every single crime or violation. There is something called the principle of proportionality. Proportionality is a legal principle as well as a rational principle for each of us. Proportionality basically says legally and constitutionally that the punishment should fit the crime. The punishment should fit the crime. So, I'm not automatically a threat to the community when I'm released later on because the parole board is going to look at that. They consider those factors. It is not a warden's prerogative or responsibility beyond what the parole board may do later. Now, we have a national emergency. These are novel times. This has not happened before in the past 100 years. You have to go back to 1917 for the influenza pandemic at that time, for anything even similar or close. And you can't compare that because the world in 1917 was very different from the world in 2020. So we need to look at the difference between potential and reality. You may talk about the potential that I may offend or reoffend if I am released from incarceration. Perfectly reasonable to talk about my potential to reoffend. However, COVID-19 is not a potential. It is here today. It is in the prisons today. It has killed inmates today. That is the reality of what has happened. Take this example. You're in your home on the banks of the river, and the water is rising. It's coming up to your porch in front of your house. The water is expected to rise further, and you look out and you see the water is coming. Now, you need to leave. You need to evacuate and get to higher ground. Do you leave your disabled sister because, one, she's crippled, quote unquote, and two, you're pissed at her because of what she did yesterday, so I'm going to leave her as the floodwaters come up? Of course not. We don't do that. We don't leave people behind like that, whether I'm in the military or I'm a civilian, whether it's a flood coming up to the house or it's a pandemic that is here today. These experiences tell us how to deal with the new experiences coming with COVID-19. This is critical thinking at its best, to think about the principle of proportionality and what that means today in my thinking as a prison official or a state official. We have to remember that along with that, there is a difference between consequences and punishment. My punishment was to be imprisoned. I was not sentenced to also be placed at risk should anything else happen unexpected or unforeseen during my time in custody. That was not in the court's order when the judge imprisoned me.
And Chief, can we at this point open up to the audience and get some responses to what you have said already? Ms. Belinda, if you want to come in at this point, otherwise we'll move to the presentation by the Black is Back Coalition members, Vice Chair Lisa Davis and Ms. Betty Davis. But if you want to respond directly to the commentary Chief Wiborg has shared already, which is consistent with our position statement.
Wow, thank you so much, Chief. You broke it down and you made it so plain and simple for us to be able to, wrap this whole thing around our mind, because, there is an indication here in Louisiana without a doubt that they don't intend to treat people like human beings that are being held in these hell holes and jails across the state. And that's the reason why we are so outraged about the fact that these are human beings. These people have families. We got people that are due to be released. We got people that are wrongfully incarcerated that are going to die in there, and they're leaving them to die in there. And we know for a fact that they are prepared to, to make this Angola a death camp. That's the reason why that we know that the people are being taken out there by the droves. And, you know, it's a sad sight because I envision that, you know, we can't just, stand around and just, say, this is wrong. It's time for us to act.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you for breaking it down and making it so simple that, we cannot handle this situation, as, we have done in the past. We're in a pandemic and it's serious. This coronavirus is killing people and they're dying.
Don't you think it's ironic that he used the analogy of what you do when the waters are rising? Well, we've already seen what happens in Louisiana to African Americans when the water is rising.
Absolutely.
So
Wow.
if at this point, if you don't mind, we'll move into our agenda to a presentation, and Ms. Davis and Lisa Davis and Betty Davis will let you all decide as to who's going to speak first. And go ahead and share with us from your perspective, and also hopefully give some response to what we've heard from our Chief Wiborg.
Oh, well, I'll jump in here since Lisa started before. And I just want to reinforce what you just said, Dr. Crenshaw, and what Sister Belinda Parker-Brown elaborated on. Those of us who saw Katrina looked at that, and we saw that the prison doors were not open, even though the prisons were flooded. And none of us will ever forget that. In addition, the Constitution has never applied to Black people. Even when the country was founded, we were considered 1/4 human. And we have been struggling against that classification for over 400 years. And I'm not the only one who's saying this. If you go to the UN has mapped out and documented, based on the evidence that our political prisoners such as Jalil Montekin have presented. I think it was Paul Robeson who said we charged genocide. So the history of the Holocaust of people of African descent, along with people who were the Aborigines on this continent, really makes it clear that this is a white settler nation. And therefore it behaves as a white settler nation. If you look at the map of Palestine in 1948, and you look at the map of Palestine today, and then you compare that to the map of the United States in the 1600s, when contrary to what people believe, this country was not empty. There were nations all across the United States. There is a map that shows all the different peoples, the Mohegans, the Apache, the Cree, and they occupy different, what we call states in this country. They are gone. And so this is what a white settler nation does. Death is success for them. What does it look like when you have a social contract that applies to all the people? The Constitution is supposed to be our social contract. We do not have a social contract. What we have is what a brother that I believe by the name of James Mills, a philosopher from Jamaica, said, we have a racial contract. And when you don't have a racial contract, you have what the mayor in San Francisco did so successfully. She immediately put the place on lockdown. She immediately started the testing. And her statistics do not look anything like the statistics of New York or Chicago or Louisiana, where there is an intent for the people to thrive and succeed and live, it is done. You look at China, if you look even at Germany, if you look at the Scandinavian countries, you're not seeing these same statistics. The social contract is working there. The social contract here is not applied to us. And the history of Louisiana makes it clear. Louisiana was the template for slavery. Louisiana had the large sugarcane plantations. They're still growing sugarcane, only they're doing it in Angola prison. And this is why Louisiana United is an international organization, because it's going to take people from all over the world to address the fact that the United States is coming incorrect.
Yeah.
There's no social contract, there's a racial contract. When you look at the current prison and Angola prison, what is it? All the contracts with corporations that the prisoners are making. The prisoners are responsible for producing the sanitation bottles and the masks, but not for themselves, but for the rest of the community. This is a racial contract. This is not a social contract. The statistics, I think, were over 9,000 people in our death camps have contracted COVID-19 as of last Wednesday. Those statistics are from the Marshall Project. You can Google that. Also, you can go to the Jericho website to learn more about the death camps that are escalating in terms of the death of people who are incarcerated. Now, I don't lay this entirely at the hands of the European Americans. One of the reasons I joined the Black is Black Coalition is they have an analysis that holds the Blackness leadership class responsible as well. It was the Blackness leadership, the Congressional Black Caucus, that voted for what we called Rockefeller laws that escalated the prison statistics that put so many of our youth in jail. They put children in jail. They predicted that our children would go to jail based on the third grade reading scores. If a child failed the third grade reading scores, they projected a prison seat for them by the time they got to be a youth in their teenage years. This is not a social contract for success. This is a racial contract for death. So the reason the statistics for death apply to us in such large numbers is because we don't control any institution. We don't control the health, we don't control education, and we certainly don't control the Democratic Party. I want to conclude, because I know others need to speak. One of the things that is not recognized about Louisiana is the industrial bullying. Okay, we know the effect of the crack cocaine laws. I believe it was Sister Belinda and Dr. Crenshaw referenced that when they talked about the prison statistics for our youth that are incarcerated in Angola. They also, however, when I came to Louisiana, I was shocked because the industrial bullying of communities resulted in large-scale poisoning of neighborhoods is so evident. It was evident 2 decades ago, it's evident now. And I know Sister Lisa is going to talk about the impact of poverty, political as well as economic poverty, is a death sentence in a large industrial capitalist country. And one of our demands is that we have the approval for some of the successful Cuban and China medicines that have already in this country. There's already a history of collaboration. We want Angola prison to be one of the first places that the Cuban doctors go to because we know they have success. They had success in Italy, they had success in France, and we know they can have success in America. And the fact that there is no collaboration in this country between these two societies is proof that we have a racial contract, not a social contract. And I want to conclude with this. We must all support Louisiana United and Belinda Parker-Brown. It is an international, it is a local, and so therefore they're in a pivotal spot to be able to assist the United States in negotiating with Cuba to bring them here like they did in Spain and in Italy. Where there is intended for success in life, you have it. The people in San Francisco, that mayor, that Black mayor who acted promptly, proved it. So let's stop the nonsense, let's stop the show, and let's get on with the solution. Testing now. And when the prisoners are released, and they must be released, you got all these empty hotels because people are not traveling. You can put them there and you can treat them there. We're not just talking about releasing them to the streets. No. And over 80% of the people who are in prison are there for nonviolent offenses. And as Sister Belinda Brown has pointed out, many of them are not even convicted of any crime. And then we're not dealing with the ones who are wrongfully incarcerated. And then we're not dealing with the ones who have aged out and are still in prison. We have one of the largest elderly populations in prison in the world. So we need to stop talking about a constitution. It does not apply to Black people, it does not apply to brown people. So please, let's not do that. Let's talk reality. And that's what this press conference is about. Support Louisiana United in any fashion that you see possible. If you can't do the economic thing, you can certainly hold the Democrats accountable. There is no way that the budget for Medicare would be the way it was if there was not collusion between the Democrats and the Republicans. Let's not act like children. Let's grow up. Let's support an institution that has the skill and has had the success so far to show us what leadership really is.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. And now Ms. Lisa Davis, Vice Chair.
Thank you again. I just want to say that as I hear you all talk about the haunting images of what happened in Katrina, and I'm in the New Jersey, the Newark area, and I remember the feeling of watching this happen and knowing that African people, and when I say African people, I mean Black people, because we are of Africa, and we will always claim that, to the feeling of knowing that it was set up so that Black people in Louisiana would bear the brunt of it. There were even a lot of information was coming out about the levees being deliberately exploded so that it would impact our communities. But even more, we saw people being left to die. That has been my feeling always as an African person in this country and victimized by colonialism, which we know was not just in this country, which we know in which the African continent was looted and African people were dispersed all over the world under a colonialist, racist system. And it's important to talk about that because we have to understand the history of policing and then the prison industrial complex, because it was rooted in oppressing African people who were rising up in this country for their freedom. Not just African people, but you also had indigenous people who were being exploited. And this is the history of policing. This is its association for people to, under colonialism and racism, to press African people, to put them down, to disperse us, to prevent us from being able to organize and to gather. These are the roots of policing in this country. So it wasn't about, to protect and to serve. That was not its roots. And we see that it continues to be like that. And then, so we have to understand that from this country's illegal colonialist inception, its foundation was built upon the enslavement, exploitation, and terrorization of African people. And then, of course, we know the indigenous people as well fall under that category. And we have to understand that upon the abolishment of chattel slavery, the prison system then rose up because they criminalized every aspect of our existence. And they wanted a way to continue to make sure that African people were enslaved and that they could exploit that labor. So this is the history of policing. This is the history of why, in large part, why we're here and having this conversation about the people in the prisons. And we know that a overwhelmingly disproportionate number of people in this mass incarceration camp are African people or Black and brown people, but definitely African people. We know this, and we know we have a system of such inequality and inequity that many of those people are there for nonviolent offenses, and many of them should not be there at all. We have a system that we absolutely cannot trust, that has no standing in our community for even being able to deliver any kind of justice, because it just does not. So we know this, and then we have a system in which oppression is socially engineered, oppression against African people, socially engineered so that we have the worst of all statistics. So we have a system that socially engineers poverty and despair so that it makes it almost impossible for most African people to even be able to properly feed our families. And so it creates the condition where many of us find ourselves in these systems of which there is no justice. So we have to look at all of that And based on that, we in the Black is Back Coalition says that this country doesn't even have the standing, really, to be able to and we cannot trust them at all. We cannot trust their so-called delivery systems or their prison industrial complex. It is something that we cannot trust. We advocate for Black community control over every aspect of our lives, and we ultimately believe that it is the Black community who should democratically be able to examine and to look at the destiny of our people under all circumstances, even those who might not uphold certain social contracts that benefit the community. It should be the African people who ultimately looks at that. But with this in mind, with this background, we must stand up against what is going on in these prisons, because now we see that they are seeking to make COVID-19 a death sentence. And this country has a history of utilizing germ warfare against African people in this country. I mean, the medical profession, that is just a reality. It is a ugly reality, but this is the reality of almost every institution in this country. And we see that the medical profession is not different at all, at least in terms of what they call medical science. And we see this happening here with this COVID-19 pandemic, but not just with COVID-19. We see this going on with the medical needs of African people or people in these prisons across the board. People in these prisons are dying. We see where disease and not being able to get medicine is literally weaponized against us. And that's one of the things, because I also happen to be with the healthcare working group, the chair of the healthcare working group of the Black is Back Coalition. And we work with the political prisoners working group of the Black is Back Coalition to really try to bring attention and to change the system of how medicine and disease is used as weapons against us. And we see this going on with COVID-19. So we just want to say that we absolutely do stand strongly in support with Louisiana United International. We stand strongly in support with all of our people who are behind bars. And we know that this situation of weaponizing COVID-19, although we recognize that Louisiana is the epicenter of it, but it is going on across this country. And we call and demand that the government and the state governments, that we demand clemency, to be provided and to be used to release the most vulnerable who are behind bars, including older people, pregnant women, people with serious illnesses, and people with compromised immune systems, low-risk offenders, people who are in pre-detention incarceration. That has to end. And we call for them to be immediately released. And as Sister Betty said, there are ways that this can happen, but certainly we must stand up against what is happening with COVID-19 and how they are weaponizing it. They are weaponizing it against Black people who are not incarcerated. So we can imagine what's going on behind the walls. So we just stand strongly in support with you. And we call for the people in Louisiana to definitely support Louisiana United International and to support all of our people who are fighting for the release of political prisoners and who are fighting to end this death camp called mass incarceration.
Thank you very much. Now, this time is for our Q&A, and I'm going to mention we just have a couple of questions, so I'm going to share them with them, and then we have the flexibility to let Mr. Washington make a comment, but we want the people in our audience to have a chance to share. One question we had is from Pastor Weaver. He's a volunteer chaplain at Jefferson Parish Correctional Center and at the Nelson Coleman Correctional Center. And he wanted to know, what is the percentage of inmates affected by coronavirus? I don't know if any of our panelists have that information offhand. I know that that information is posted on the website for the Department of Public Safety and Corrections. So unless someone has those numbers offhand, Pastor Weaver, I'll personally commit to getting that information to you after the the press conference. So does any of our panelists have that information offhand? The percentage of inmates affected by coronavirus?
I can give a reference, Dr. Crenshaw. As I referenced when I spoke earlier, the Marshall Project. It's a legal group that has been trying to monitor prison statistics. But I think we do have to recognize that, as the chief said, there is no, shall we say, transparency in terms of how the deaths are reported for prisoners. And you must go to the Jericho website. It's JERICHO, the Jericho website. That's a political prisoner website, but they also monitor all of the prison statistics that they can receive on a national basis, and they list it by state. So again, I want to say the Marshall Project and the Jericho website. And I want to add a statistic, not a statistic, but a news article from the Washington Post, that we have a lot of youth that are incarcerated in juvenile detention homes. And Louisiana now is having a situation where the youth in these detention centers, these youth houses, are testing positive for COVID-19. So certainly, you can't justify nonviolent offenders being released. How in the world can you justify not releasing and treating children?
Now, we have one other question that I'm going to share now, and then we'll have Mr. Washington speak. We're going to wrap up hopefully promptly at the half hour. So if our speakers can keep that in mind. Now, the next question is, what penalty can be enforced upon prison officials who violate federally mandated laws, policies, or regulations under a national emergency order concerning inmate mistreatment during this COVID-19 pandemic? Okay, so what is it? Penalties for violations of laws. Well, I can interject that some of this behavior, if it depends on whether it's considered a violation of our civil laws, whether it's a constitutional tort, a violation of constitutional rights, or whether it's considered a criminal offense. Now, when you start talking about public officials and government and having liability for their conduct, it becomes very complicated because there's immunities, there's notice requirements, there's a lot of insulation of our public officials and governments for responsibility and it's for their conduct. And to a certain extent, rightly so, but to a certain extent, a lot of times it suppresses appropriate accountability. Now, criminal liability, it becomes complicated because you have to try to establish intent, deliberate intent. What is it? What is it called? I can't remember the term, but there can be some criminal liability. But one of the things that we're going to discuss with our action items is that, to the extent our public officials don't heed what is being conveyed through LUI's position statement, what is being reemphasized by every presenter panelist this morning, that what they're doing is unconstitutional, that they cannot make life and death decisions just because people are incarcerated. They have constitutional rights. The punishment should fit the crime. People who, no matter their offense, they have not been sentenced to die, the horrible death of infection by COVID virus. So at the very least, there is our contention that there's some violations of international human rights law. And unfortunately, the United States has insulated us as private individuals from being able to access the international human rights bodies, the mechanisms they have for holding public officials accountable when they do such things as commit crimes against humanity. So we'll talk a bit about that, because we're going to be calling for the United States to open up avenues for accountability, because it's difficult to get it through domestic laws because of all these different immunities and that sort of thing. So those are our questions. Now, we don't have much more time, Mr. Washington, because we need to go over the action items. But do you have some comments that you want to add that supplement what's been presented already?
Hello, everyone. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I'd like to thank you today for this opportunity and for United International. And Ms. Leah, one of your questions is like prosecutorial misconduct, withholding exculpatory evidence from the defense. It's laws on the book, but they've just been slapped on the wrist, and that's our biggest problem. Like the 10-2 unanimous decision that we have finally got rid of. Prosecutors didn't, a lot of the cases, they did not prove the case. They just got conviction on the 10-2. Mm-hmm. I'd like to thank United International. I'm going to give a quote from Dr. King. Dr. King said, "A man cannot ride your back unless you bend over." And I'd like to thank United International for standing up for what is right and injustice. And that's what we have to do. We have to support each other. We have to do just like Dr. King did. We have to unite. That's why Miss Belinda named her organization, that we have to unite together and fight injustice, just like Dr. King did. There's laws in the book, like a civil, criminal, that these public officials do. But we got to stand up and use it. It takes knowledge, it takes money to stand up and fight for what is right.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. So glad we got a chance to get your contribution, because you made some key points. Thank you so much. Before we go to our action items, and I'm going to share our screen, and I want to note that we have in our audience advocates who are similarly situated. They're making the same type of demands with regard to other discernible populations of imprisoned people across the country. We have a couple of audience members who are advocating for the disabled, the physically disabled who are incarcerated. They're particularly vulnerable, susceptible to risks associated with COVID-19. So they're calling for evacuations. We have an advocate, April Henry. She's referencing for us not to forget the people who are mistreated at the hospitals and the nursing homes. Of course, the nursing home, to a large extent, can be very well analogized with incarcerated populations. Terry Pelham is one of the most effective advocates out there for the incarcerated communities that that's contending with this COVID-19. And so I'm very happy that they're part of our audience. And that just goes to show you our focus is on Louisiana and the obscenely large number of African Americans who are incarcerated in this state. But the call for respect of the rights and the human dignity of people that are, again, suffering this assault by the COVID-19 virus just as much as all the rest of us are. And they're more vulnerable because they're confined. Our ranks are expanding, and we're bringing in advocates who are representing a lot of diverse special interest groups but are still part of that prison population. Ms. Pelham is making the point in her comment that, we have to remember that statistics indicate that people convicted of violent crimes, with the exception of chronic offenders, are less likely to reoffend than low-level offenders, such as drug or theft. We simply cannot take convictions at face value. This is a new situation where old policies simply cannot be applied. That's just echoing what Chief Wiborg has said. So this is going to grow, And I'm going to share my screen and have you look at, okay, no, that's not what I want. Hold on for a second. Okay, just 1 minute. I am going to share my screen, but what I'm going to try to find, just 1 second, if you bear with me. Okay, here it is. Okay, and then let me find, okay. Now, hopefully you all can see, I don't have anything in the way. This is a page from Louisiana United International. And what you all need to do is get clear in your mind the web address. I'll add it to the chat room, but it's www.LAUnitedi, don't forget that I at the end, .org. So that's LAUnitedi.org. And if you get to our website, you should see it up here in the URL bar, the website address, and get to our page, Fight COVID-19. And what you'll see is a list of our action items. The U.S. legal system is ineffective. And Ms. Betty Davis talks in terms of the Constitution doesn't apply to African American communities, and to a large extent, her organizations in the Black Coalition have transcended arguments based on enforcement of our U.S. Constitution. However, the fact remains that the United States is part of the international community of nations, and they have obligations that are part of our federal law to provide its citizens with effective avenues of redress. Our country can't guarantee that we won't ever get our rights violated, but what they are obliged to provide us is effective avenues of redress. And hopefully what everyone is discerned from what has been said today is that we don't have effective avenues of redress. Miss Belinda, you can tell them how long have we been fighting this fight? If you keep coming back to the table, something is not effective about the avenues of redress. You can point out whatever deficiencies in our advocacy, but at this point, when you're talking about fundamental rights for respect of human dignity, the ability to be able to live, to have your government not simply leave you to die in the middle of a national or regional emergency, then our country's legal system does not effectively protect legal rights if we have to have press conferences and rally just to keep our loved ones from dying in response to a deadly virus that's no fault of their own. So our first action item is we're going to have you click on that if you would, and go to our website under Fight COVID-19, and you'll see demand the Trump administration meet with a delegation that includes LUI. And we've started this process in 2019. They need to be speaking with us about making our legal system effective. And
Right.
Now we're going to also demand that Congress add the United States to the International Criminal Court so that we can bring charges as individuals and as private organizations of crimes against humanity. At this point, the United States doesn't allow us to do that because we're not a member of the International Criminal Court. So we need you to click on that and sign a petition to make that demand. With regard to Louisiana, click on that, and you're going to be signing the petition to demand that Governor Edwards meet with Ms. Belinda and whoever else she designates, and have us the direct part of the process of evacuating the people who are incarcerated in Louisiana. We want you to read our position statement. It's a pretty legalistic document, but we want you, if you have, particularly if you have an organization, email us at info@launitedi.org. That's info@launitedi.org if you want to be a signatory to that position statement. And finally, join LUI and donate. So on that point, Ms. Belinda, if you could talk with our audience in the last minute or so about the need to join our organization and donate. Oh, and let me also show you right quick while you make those comments. Let me keep on the screen. We have a link on our webpage for Join Us, Donate. You can go right onto that page and click and join us. You can make a donation. You can register for our event, our activity, or you can request member services if you are a member of our organization. And we got a whole list of different services that we can make available to you in exchange for the modest sum. It's not coming up on the screen. There you go. We have a whole list of services that we can provide, substantial services. You see that nice word free. That's if you're a member of LUI. So I talked us through your last minute, Ms. Belinda. Can you go ahead?
Well, let me go right ahead and thank
Okay.
all of our great panelists for their dynamic presentation. I am so grateful and appreciative that we can have such powerful people to be a part of a conference such as this, but there are going to be many more coming forth. And, you know, I also want to extend my gratitude and gratefulness to you, Dr. Zena, for being so, you know, modest and you know, to keep us all focused and on task with this mission. Listen, people, you know, I want you to know this. I want you to take this away with you. To all of our listeners that are out there, that it's time for us to focus on us. I mean, Sister Betty made it plain. You know, Michael Jackson told it that they really don't care about us in a song. Now listen, you know, and the chief, you know, his expression to the fact that, you know, this COVID-19 is serious and they're not taking us serious. So therefore we cannot do things as usual. It cannot be the same old. You know, we cannot have our little pop-up groups over here, pop-up group over there. Everybody got their little groups everywhere, spread it out, because that's what they want to keep us separated and divided. But Minister Washington hit the nail right on the head. Unless we unite and come together to be a powerful force, okay, to hold these people accountable and let them know that we're serious, that we're not going back. We're going to fight until they get it all the way right. So thank you again. Thank you so very much for participating in this conference, and that is going to be many, many more to come. So don't forget to go to that those contacts or to our website, you know, follow us and keep in touch with us so that we can keep this movement going and energize and get to where we need to go, and that is to make things better for all people. Thank you.
Thank you. That is the end of our press conference this morning. We apologize for any time overrides, but I think that the seriousness of the issue and the people who are dependent on us, their lives literally depend on us, appreciate us being willing to have some flexibility with their time constraints. Don't you think? I think that,
Yeah,
that the cause
absolutely, Dr.
is
Zena, because
that.
there's so much more we want to have to say. You know, I know there were some difficulties for some of our panelists being able to maneuver their way through the site, but we're going, like I said, this is forthcoming. You know, it's going to be many, many more, and we're not going to stop until, you know, we get it all the way right, and that is to fight back and let the people know that we're coming for this change, because now is the time. We can't wait.
Okay, our conference has been recorded. We have a couple of more questions in the chat room. We'll make sure that you get a response at some point during this week. For that, everyone have a nice day, and thank you. Don't forget to go to www.launitedi.org, and then you will be able to access the links. It's important that we not only gather, but we also follow up with our action items. We've got to make our numbers count, or all this talking is just what it is, all this talking. So we need you to take action. We need you to join our organization. We need you to donate. There's also the Black is Back Coalition. We encourage you to go to their website, Black is Back coalition.org. We've got to, if we just leave it at talking, that's where it's going to be left. So everybody have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.